my friends, to the Fat Man's revisitation of FASA's version of Star Trek, the role-playing game. This began in the early 80s and ran into the mid-90s, early 90s, I'm pretty sure. Seems like the last installment I remember buying would have been for either The Journey Home or The Undiscovered Country. It might have been The Undiscovered Country. I think I have a source book / module for that one. And then after that, I can't say if they discontinued the series there, they lost the franchise rights to it, or if the game company itself closed. I know there was something that was going on at the time, but I was pretty good about buying these things as we went through. There's actually quite a bit of extensive stuff with Star Trek, and one of the things that I've always liked about Star Trek is that it has many levels of potential play. It also has possibilities, excuse me, of playing outside your standard action, sci-fi, adventure kind of stuff, depending on your type of player. So if you have players who are more cerebral or more challenged by puzzles and brain teasers and things like that, you can work them in better than you can, say, something like Star Wars. There's a lot of similar ground from the old space opera, which I cut my teeth on originally, and then before FASA came out with Star Trek, before West End Games came out with Star Wars, we had other sci-fi RPGs that we used to fill in the gaps, the missing gaps. So we created our own versions of Star Trek and Star Wars using rules such as space operas. As big and as clunky and as funky as they were and still are. So, we learn and build and specifically gain things for the individuals as we go. The other thing about Star Trek in general is that the canon is pretty well established. A lot of people, like Star Wars, have seen Star Trek, so it doesn't take a huge amount of world building or imagination to slip into the role of somebody in the Star Trek universe, regardless what it is. And a third advantage for Star Trek over a lot of the other sci-fi versions of games is the fact that, just like it has a very deep backstory and a wide-ranging field, it has a very large open sandbox to work with. It also, within that sandbox, is a timeline, and it's a sliding active timeline. So you even have precedents for time travel, so your characters could be whisked back in time. You want to do a variant of I can't think of the name of the countdown something or another, where you could take a Galaxy class cruiser and accidentally time warp back to, let's say, the 4-Year War or the Romulan War era, and find yourself helping defend the Federation, or even earlier than that, helping to establish the Federation, going and completely rewriting the timeline. Otherwise, from a play perspective, the GM and players can pick a timeline and have a lot of information on it. So if you wanted to be TOS, if you want to play during the TV series, you wanted to play during the Enterprise era, Bakula's Enterprise, or in Captain Kirk's timeline, which was the TV series, Next Generation, DS9, so on and so forth. So technically speaking, you could pick and choose a timeline, and FAST has catered a lot of material will work for that. So you don't have to go out of your way to find a load of information on that sort of thing. So in this particular installment, I wanted to focus on something that's a very hot topic item on the internet and YouTube. There's a lot of information. There's on the 4-Year War. The recent TV series Discovery is, in theory, a alternate timeline variant of the 4-Year War. Now, FASA, like I said, the writers didn't go out of their way to fluff and fill as little as possible. They tried to stick within the known canon. They talked to writers and designers and builders and so on and so forth, whenever the opportunity presented themselves. They also looked at the material that had been presented for the TV series, various shows and movies, and focused on then filling in the gaps, so to speak. And that being said, there is a lot of information that's actually valid to the canon. There's a fanfic potential movie called The Return to Axar that's been up and down because of legal reasons. Well, Axar is the planetary system where the first war between the first open war between the Federation and the Klingons take place, and it does take place over a period of 4 years, which is why they call it the 4-Year War. And I've done a number of side bits on this particular subject that always kind of bugged me and bothered me, but we're not going to go into details there. This is the, I would call it a source book more than a module, but you could make your argument however you want to do it. Talks about first contact. This is before the Federation, when the U.S. Before, let me rephrase it, before the Prime Directive was created for the Federation, contact was made with the native population on the planet Axnar, and it didn't go well. Now, there was some issues, right? And several issues, actually. See, editor's note. Ironically, Captain Huckleby makes references to the need for a regulation not yet in existence, General Order Number 1. If this regulation had been enforced, the corresponding effect on the future of Axnar and the Federation as a whole would have been significantly different. Roads not traveled. The Ensign 14, who led the away team, lost his entire away team but himself and one other. And the one other had slipped off when nobody was paying attention and basically left some progeny behind, which is a no-no, and it affects the eventual genetic makeup of the local population. Not that it matters for gameplay, but that's, one of those things that they kind of frown on in the Federation today and then in the future. And his direct interaction and references to spacefaring and being technologically advanced spacefaring entity causes no end of social and cultural upheaval amongst the locals, which isn't a good thing either. Part 2 is a ship from the United Nations spaceship Bonaventure, which had been sent some years later to follow up on the original first contact to see how things were going. Says the Axorians are very much like humans in appearance, though a little shorter with higher mass to height ratio, most like the Aleutian people on Earth, blah, blah, blah. Warlike race organized loosely into tribes. They're openly hostile to all outsiders, successfully killing half of my 8-man contact team in an ambush. The rest of us were taken prisoner. As we were not searched, we were still armed. In my judgment, they could have killed us in their surprise attack, so I surmise they have reasons for taking us captive. Editor's note, Inside 14's biography to be a god described in great depth his personal experiences on Axnar, and although outdated, I understand it's still optional reading at Starfleet Academy. Second Contact. Yeah, this is the second time. All right, Marcos Aurelius Johnson, commanding the USS Yardley. What other mission was to evaluate long-term impact of the UNSS Bonaventure had on the society and culture of the delicate Orcos, i.e. Axnar, and whether or not the planet could be opened up for interstellar trade. At this time of the Bonaventure's visit, the Prime Director was not in effect. It is for us, but because it is, and because of the things that were already done to the planet, they have a circumventional ability to go around first the Prime Directive in this case. Editor's note, Commander Johnson did not take advantage of the opportunity to carefully examine the Bonaventure's logs. If he had, things might have been clearer to him. First 7-man contact team was shuttled down, dressed as Axorian traders. The socialist Marxist returned reported 6 casualties. Natives upon discarding team was unknown in the area, asked if they were of the 14. Apparently there is some kind of myth regarding that number, i.e. Ensign 14, right? You get the mistake there that locals are making. Presumably, they let him return alive so he could tell his tribe of the strength of their belief in the 14. So this is what happens when you have first contact with a primitive society. In this case, they deified and created a religion around their contact. Let's see. Third contact is final log extracted from the ship's recorded buoy containing Captain's log, USS Gulliver. Instructions of current assignment of the USS Gulliver were to evaluate Axar culture for lifting of the non-interference directive. Instructions not carried out due to the presence of non-Federation forces in the Axarian system. Made a appropriate approach to Axar, discovered 8 alien starships in the vicinity. Computer analysts configured reported 5 Klingon D4 cruisers, 2 Klingon D16 destroyers. At present, also present, one of their vessels not known to the computer at the time. It turned into be an assault ship bringing ground troops. A T-38 assault ship. But the Klingons destroyed the scout, and because they were basically annexing Axar. We got social evaluation, Axar's development. Then we got our history, the UFP Klingon background, UFP social political background. And I'm not going to get into detail on these because there's a lot that could be said and argued. Social political background, criticism. Here's a piece. From the brink of disaster, Federation Assistant Commissioner, now High Commissioner Michelle Ferris. It's easy to say the Federation of Planets has successfully maintained peace within its sphere ever since the bloodbath of the Romulan War. Truth is that after the Romulan War, we grew fat and complacent as the Syrian Bandersnatch after feeding. Federation was unbeatable in military. Its military forces were all powerful, or so we told ourselves in closed chamber meetings and from the speaking balconies of dozen score worlds. And yet, at the same time, people complained that the Federation Council's impersonality, only the gravest complaints were handled at the highest level. The enormous bureaucracy not controlling the Federation. The Archimedes debacle, it was example enough. It's time to draw back, some said. Let's turn to blah, blah, blah. Also noted that most of the ship designs that were currently in use for Starfleet were based on 40-year-old designs. Most of these ships were 30 and 40 years old and ill-equipped and prepared to fight a galactic war against a much better equipped, more numerous enemy, which is a reoccurring theme we see over and over and over again throughout the Federation's future history, which I've mentioned several times in other video logs. UFE military background, from mass fleets from Admiral Samuel Shepard. After the Romulan War, high officials of the Federation certain another war would not occur quickly once installations were completed along the Romulan border. Future role Starfleet Command seemed limited navigational and simple laws of law enforcement duties. Adult appropriations for Starfleet operations were cut sharply. Funds for research and development and only modest technical advances. Several flag engineering disagree. They believe that third nacelle is okay. Talk about having a 3 nacelle ship and why it failed. Tactics. Other source supply was newly established Brigade Academy. This goes to show that in the original canon, in the original Star Trek series, they did have ship marines. Ships had security, but they actually had a dedicated Marine Corps, which would be the equivalent of Mako from prior to the formation of the Federation, or this is where Mako would be folded in. And later years, at some point, the Marine Corps is either diminished in its role, or absorbed into Starfleet security in general, or just disbanded. I'm not quite sure exactly how that would have played out in canon, but I know that by the time of the Next Generation, supposedly, it's a mixed bag. They don't have a dedicated ground special force commando unit trained to do what all those sort of special ops people do, and yet there's mention of ground combat because Miles O'Brien himself had spent some time on a planet fighting the Cardassians at length as a grunt. So, as a member of the ship's crew, delegated to ground combat duty or something, you have to look up his information and get more, to get more detail on that background. The U.S. military, or the UFP military background of criticism. Yeah, typical. This almost echoes some of the behaviors of the United States over the past 50 years. If you really, really look at the world history from the outside, it's not the same as what many of us are taught here in the States, in my opinion. Humans in the humanoid dominant federation always find someone else to blame for other than themselves. When they have a war with the Romulans, they blame the Romulans for the hostile, aggressive actions. When they make hostile contact with the Klingon Empire and later learn the Orions knew of the Klingons, they blame the Orions for not telling. When things nearly go sour at the Babel Conference, even other humans want to return home, they blame the poor economy. For the Archimedes crisis, they blame the ethics of truly honorable Terralite merchants. When the dilithium crystals are found in the Orion system, they seize all they can for the lowest possible pay, and then again blame the Orions for wanting to share their mineral wealth with the Klingons. One would think all the troubles in the large galaxy are combined to the fault of the Orions and Tellarites. The truth is, the Federation as a whole is just not ready to face all there is. Too often they disagree amongst themselves and show an indecisive attitude when forced to make a decision. They might take lessons from the diplomat of Teller. They should look for themselves for the answer, not blame all others. A strong military is important, yes, but also are the principles of economic war. Ryans are the true winners of the 4 years of war, for they learned the needed lessons and sold valuable goods to both sides, making much money. In the future, it would be not the Orions that get all the limelight; it's the Ferengi that came the pinnacle of economic greed and movers of commerce. The Klingon strategy. Klingon strategy, a new theory. It's an interesting sidebar because this is something that's very briefly mentioned in a lot of the early canon support books, like the Starfleet Academy manual and others that were created to fuel the public's desire from all things Star Trek during original TV and the series The Next Generation, that there was an unknown war, that one of the reasons that the 4-year war came to a conclusion, as far as the Klingons were concerned, was because the Klingons were suddenly finding themselves fighting a two-front war. They were fighting a war against an unknown war on the opposite border from the Federation, when they come up against some alien species that was tacitly known as the demons in Klingon, that were extremely difficult to combat. Not that they were technologically advanced, they were just extremely robust or destructive. So in the later years in the TV series and stuff, we never see a mention of it again. And to my knowledge, there's still no concrete stipulation as to what kind of races lie on the other side of the Klingons from the Federation, because it just never comes up. But in here it says, war involving Federation was postponed by a policy of aggression and expansion in areas that Klingon Empire not near the Federation. As a result, the Klingon Imperial forces turned forward, apparently seeking inexpensive, meaningful gain of territory. Something from little information we have, their efforts were sharply thwarted by another race or races occupying that region of space. The casualties mounted in the unknown war. High Command was forced to reconsider their strategy. Excuse me, this is the reason why the Klingons decided to expand into Federation direction. It's because they got thwarted in the other direction. For a number of years after the conclusion of the unknown war, other family lines began to show extreme displeasure to the Emperor's apparent cowardice and the threatened open warfare against the High Council itself. Believe the abortive sneak attack against the Federation transport U.S. Flying Fortress resulted in extreme embarrassment for the high-level officials of the Klingon Empire, and to search elsewhere for glory and conquest. And until enough time had passed, their failure had forgotten, lack of success on the forward front refocused the Klingon attention on an adversary that judged to be less dangerous, i.e. the Federation. Yes, and at the time that would be quite true. And then we got the Klingon perspective on NXR. a number of task forces that had been dispatched prior to the encounter with the USS Gulliver, but but for all intents and purposes, the Klingons were building up for a major offensive against the Federation border, and this was just the first opening gambit, so it didn't take us nearly as long as Starfleet assumed it would for the Klingons to get into full swing of things, because the Klingons have been preparing, and apparently the Federation had not paid attention and dropped the ball on this. Not to add that to the fact that the Federation Starfleet was not prepared properly to deal with any kind of massive aggression, and it cost a lot early on. The declaration of war. This is where Captain Garth comes in, piloting a destroyer, commanding a destroyer. The USS Bahama Richard, Captain Garth was given overall command of the squadron in order to maintain complete surveillance in the Axar system. Stardate 1/9403, the USS Gulliver, a Sawyer-class scout, received instructions to make a routine evaluation of Axar sociological development as a follow-up to earlier evaluation conducted by the USS Yardley. Stardate, a single D4E cruiser traveling warp 5, spotted near 8 parsecs from the Axar by the USS Exetfon, a Markham-class destroyer. Commander of the Exxon, Captain Garth Visor, prudently maintained observation for a matter of days, exactly plotting the Klingon ship's course to Van's only possible destination, the interdicted world Axnar. Stringing new orders to clear the USS Gulliver had not been heard from, blah, blah. Realizing the tactical situation as well as the distance for this unfriendly vessel within Federation space, Garth engaged the D4, ordering his commander to surrender. When the vessel attempted to activate shields and initiate combat with Xenophon, Garth used superior tactics to disable the Klingon's warp engines with skillful laser fire. This action left the enemy ship on impulse power alone, and then rendering effectively harmless. On Stardate 1/9406.05, the USS Bahama Richard detected a homing beacon coming from the ship's recorder buoy. Moving in, the crew retrieved the device, learned it was from the USS Gulliver. Crews immediately set a course for an Axar, transmitting its log and the log of the Gulliver to the Starfleet Command, who in turn contacted the Federation Council. By this time, Garth and Xenophon were already on their way to Axar at warp point 622. As the word of the Gulliver's fate reached the Federation Council, a declaration was prepared and transmitted on all major hailing frequencies to the commanding officer Klingon Task Force at Axar. He was given a choice between withdrawing its entire force at Klingon border while under Starfleet escort and outright surrender. Yeah, we know how that went. And in the early months of the war, so the conditions were grave for the forces of Starfleet. After Captain Garth's overwhelming victory at the Battle of Axar, he received additional reinforcements moved in the Axar system itself by executing a flawless Delta Z maneuver against the Klingon force, and now known as the Second Battle of Axar. Garth soundly defeated their 7-warship invasion fleet and accepted the surrender of Klingon Admiral Korisatha. Though it was touch and go for a while, the H-ship, the T-38 assault transport, was located on the surface of the planet. Crew recovered and tractor being placed on the vessel. That same vessel now rests in the Starfleet Spaceflight Museum on Luna. And then in the next few months, several Klingon squadrons containing 50 or more D-78 cruisers and each entered unclaimed regions of space between Federation and Klingon Empire. The decisive battles at Andromeda, Genmex, Leia, and Lissadun were fought, and Jani 4 was subjected by regiments of Klingon soldiers in the first ground action of the war. Klingons showed some weakness in tactical skills, but tend to make up for it in numbers, forcing a 3 or 4-1 numerical superiority defending UFP cruisers and destroyers. The counter at Lee was a prime example. Klingon D-4Es of the 127th Cruiser Squadron caught the U.S. Constitution at Peril Larson destroyers in a quick but vicious swarming attack. Federation cruiser was raked amidship, suffering extensive damage. One destroyer exploded. As the Klingon forces bypassed the defending task force in search of even greater kills, Starfleet tacticians were gratified to see the Cochrane deceleration whenever it was worth. Blah. We talk about attack on the colonies, different various battles. Both sides continued to gear up their ship construction. Docks at Starbase 15 were now fully operational. Other major shipyards were quickly adding the Federation's available forces. See, and once again, over and over and over again, we see this again and again and again. The Federation confronts itself confronted by a foe it can't outwit and can't outtalk, and it initially can't outfight. So it uses its technological engineering and production capability to outconstruct as best it can. This fails them when it comes to the Dominion War, because apparently the Dominion can outproduce the Federation even when it's not in their home turf. They were able to continually field larger and larger fleets of ships against the Federation and its allies as the war progressed, was because of its superior construction capability and their ability basically to construct Jem'Hadar who are going to pilot these warships. That is something that they don't talk about, as far as I'm concerned, in any of the material that I've seen that discusses, well, the Federation can produce thousands of ships in a hurry, hundreds of ships, in a short period of time, and thousands more in a reasonable amount of time. But it's another animal to crew them with trained crews. It takes much longer to train a crew than it does to build a ship. I'm just saying. They never quite addressed that scenario in DS9 or any of the others that I've seen. Holding the line, the fight goes on. Federation ships begin to become more adapted. They started including phaser technology and photon technology, while the Klingons apparently are not adapting as fast as the Federation. Fleet deployment criticism. Yeah, this is where certain individuals complain that at the latter part of the 4-year war, the Constitution-class heavy cruiser comes online, and it's such cutting-edge technology that the powers that be decide to make a choice not to let it participate in the 4-year war, because they're afraid that either it'll be a spectacular failure, which will make them look bad, or worse, one of the ships will be damaged sufficiently enough that the Klingons can grab it, and then they would have a huge advantage in all the extra tech and stuff that went into the design. So the very heavy warship designed specifically to fight in conflict against the Klingon Empire is prevented from being used in frontline service. So the question deserves to be raised. With the initial design and subsequent success of construction program of the new Constitution-class cruisers, curious that these ships were specifically excluded from combat duty during the latter months of the 4 Years' War. Although designed primarily for exploration and containing most sophisticated scientific research laboratories in ship and service, Constitution-class cruisers are the most powerful individual ships in all of Starfleet at the time. They were freely permitted in combat during the first year of the war, but after Stardate 9603, they only served in their pre-war roles as survey, exploration, and planetary contact, i.e. they pulled them away from the conflict area and sent them as far away from the Klingons as possible. Station Klingon border, the more distant, safer sectors of operation. From defense to offense, finally at a point where the Federation starts to get the upper hand and pushes the Klingons back. The Klingon High Commander Ruger had been taken, sent large number of ground troops and equipment outside through their ground forces rated progress. Or possibly remembering failures at Sinbad 4, the Klingons used chlorothalongen for the first time, a chemical lethal nerve gas, actually designed for inflicting agony on its victims, for killing them, demonstrated a new level of brutality in Klingon tactics. The Federation recovery ship eventually moved in and retreated very few survivors. Many Marines were killed. Most of the survivors were captured and later killed by their Klingon captors. Colonel Wilhelm Mandela, commanding officer of the 5th Marine Regiment and one of the few high-ranking officers to survive Ruger, summed up with a conflict with a grim pun on the planet's name when he called it this battle the Ready Gore War. General Order 7, the only Starfleet order ever to carry a penalty of death, came through at this time. Prohibited anybody from traveling to Talos 4 and went into effect after its recommendation by Captain Christopher Pike from the USS Enterprise. Oddly, no reasons were given. Just a great big mystery. Major setback with Klingon Emperor took place at Kessa, and the Federation's fast-moving 84th Special Task Force at Baton Rouge class cruisers got behind enemy supply lines and ambushed a vital Klingon convoy heading forward to supply. Blah. Final phase. Basically, the Klingons overextended their logistics supply. At this point, the senior Klingon officers saw their worst logistical fears confirmed. The supplies and needed frontline repair facilities became more important than the sheer numbers of combat vessels. They just couldn't keep up with them. The Federation did a better job of constructing everything it needed to support its fleet in the forward action area. It had already been doing that sometime prior. That's one of the few things that they did right, was when they were, always pushing forward new star bases to support their exploration. This then allowed them to have a very decent logistics capability closer to the front than the enemy did. So we have the aftermath. And pretty basic stuff. And we talk about related issues, trade and commerce and criticism, Romulan factor. There was a minute there when the Romulans nosy, but they didn't get involved in this at the beginning. Worried the Federation, which diverted ships to the Romulan border, and then when the Romulans didn't appear and no conflict seemed to be in the brewing, they were able to redirect those forces later back to the Klingon front. The Federation Council, and we have a list of ships of war from both sides that served both the Klingons and the Starfleet. Advancements of technology, advances in military technology, mostly the phasers and photon torpedoes started to become standard aboard Federation starships. Consequences for military shipbuilding theory. Post-war UFP Klingon relations also become quite complicated after this point. It's not until the next potential conflict occurs, which is, I believe, the time when the Organians step in and mandate a forced border between the Federation and the Klingons to maintain peace. That's for a different video. The Exorian missions, the Exorian perspective. Exorians, this is one of those that left some issues with the Federation because they're victors and they return to the planet, and the population of the planet, which were not spaceflight capable, were not capable of fitting most of the tenets of the Articles of Federation, demand to be admitted as full members to the Federation, because they, at this point, had been exposed to not only Federation and pre-Federation personnel, but then the Klingons as well, and then post 4-year war rebuilding efforts assisted by the Federation, because the Prime Directive is no longer pliable to NXR. So it was a sticky situation that eventually was resolved by allowing them in as a provincial member. They're still a warlike, and they themselves, their culture had a ways to go before they could gain full membership, and that was part of the deal. Federation Science Conference resulted in a predictable number of administrative conflicts. Editor's note: Ambassador Lloyd's book and everything Exorian feeling of bold egotism and arrogance shows through the war for liberation is what the Exorians called the 4 Years' War, and their absent, unswerving, incorrect belief about the true cause of the conflict. that somehow everybody was fighting over them and their planet because that's where the value is at. And we got the timeline. It goes through basically and gives you the breakdown of instant by instant, conflict by conflict to some degree. So you can see there's quite a bit of information in here. Starship tactics, Klingon tactics, Federation tactics at this time, special formations that were used and were successful or didn't successful, task force compositions, and then we got some operation maps showing where some of these conflicts, incursions took place and the reactions to and by the Federation and the Klingons. So and if you look at it, it's not a very big book, but it has a lot of information. You have an entire campaign or several campaigns that could be revolved around this one campaign book by itself. I'm just saying. So, as you can see, 4-Year War, and I hope you'll enjoy with me the rest of these things because we have many more to come. Just sitting here right now is the Romulan War, Klingon Intelligence Briefing. I got several books on the Klingons, and a lot of material to be covered over the next 4 or 5 months. Till next time, this is the Fat Man saying, keep your phasers on stun. Yeah? All right.